My name is Shakil Sayyed. I have the privilege, inshallah ta'ala, to be your host tonight. And we have a very informative and exciting evening, which will enlighten us and inform us and hopefully mobilize us as well for the cause of justice. As is our tradition, we will begin invoking the name of the Creator of all of us. And for that, we have Brother Samir, who inshallah will recite a few verses from Quran.
Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. صدق الله العظيم. The translation of which is, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, O you who have attained faith, be ever steadfast in upholding equity, bearing witness to the truth for the sake of God, even though it be against your own selves or your parents and kinsfolk. Whether the person concerned be rich or poor, God's claim takes precedence over the claims of either of them. Do not then follow your own desires, lest you swerve from justice. For if you distort the truth, behold, God is indeed aware of all that you do.
Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Samir Sharain, for your reminder for our collective responsibility for which we have gathered here tonight. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity to be here tonight and express my deep gratitude and respect for these 11 young men and their parents, their families, their friends, and all the legal experts who have helped them from last year and are continuing to help today, and the diverse supporters from throughout the country and beyond, people of various faiths and traditions and political orientations who stand in solidarity with these young men. And I also feel privileged to be part of this history, a very rich history of us as Muslims in North America, and I firmly believe that it will remain incomplete if the story of UCI 11 is not included in that rich history of Muslims in North America. On behalf of myself and also on behalf of the Islamic Shura Council, I'm proud. I'm proud to stand here to join all of you for a cause that's greater than all of us. A simple one, but an important one. A fundamental right to speak freely against injustice, against anyone, and against anywhere and anywhere. I am reminded of the same ayah that was recited by Brother Samir in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, 135, where we are commanded to stand up firmly for justice as witnesses to God. Even if your witness is against yourselves, your parents, your kin, and whether they be rich or poor, and indeed, God knows all. So standing up and speaking up against injustice is a divine mandate, and none of us can ever subject telling of truth to political bargaining or to the calculus of socio-political interests of anyone. And I believe it is only, among others, for this reason that people from across faith groups and ethnicities, professions and political orientations continue to remain in solidarity with the UCI 11 for their speaking truth to power and speaking truth about power. Los Angeles Times, in an editorial this year in the month of February, I believe on 7, 2011, said it well, although I don't agree with LA Times editorials more often than not. Said about those who wish to prosecute the protesters against the corrupt and against the powerful, and I quote, "Despite the Orange County District Attorney's Rakakas soapbox musings about the future of our democratic society, the fact is that America would not have devolved into anarchy if these criminal charges had not been brought. Shame on him pretending it would have," end of quote. And we too say, shame on him indeed. I am also reminded today of an Orwellian adage: during times of universal deceit, telling truth becomes a revolutionary act. We may now add to that, telling truth may also become a criminal act. And criminal it must not become, and inshallah it will not become, but there is a precondition to that. Only if and when you and I stand up and speak up against injustice by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Once again, I am proud, just as you are, to stand with the UCI 11 by virtue of our moral and financial support to defend their right. To defend their right and say, not I think, therefore I am, but rather I rebel. I think, I rebel, and therefore I am. They did their part, and we have to do our part tonight, today, and days to come. So for that, inshallah, there are several speakers who are going to inform us, inspire us, and call us for action. The remainder of about 45 minutes would flow as follows. I would invite one of the board representatives of the Council of American Islamic Relations of the Greater LA Chapter, Sister Amana Siddiqui, who will come and share her words of wisdom and on behalf of CARE Greater Los Angeles. Following that will be an attorney of the UCI 11, Daniel Mayfield, who is here. Following that will be another attorney, Linda Moreno. We expect that by the time you leave this room today, after emptying your pockets, you'll be halfway through your legal studies, and you will become a semi-attorney, or pseudo-attorney. And then we'll break for Maghrib. I believe the Maghrib Salat would be outside behind this hall. And then our dear brother Khalil Meek, who is the president of Muslim Legal Fund of America, and you have a little brochure on your chairs. Take a look at it, of the fine work that they do throughout the country on very challenging legal cases, such as the one that we have on our hands here tonight. And then Brother John Esposito, I call him brother from the bottom of my heart. He will speak, he will give his keynote, and then thereafter would be a appeal by Brother al-Talib, who will ask all of us and remind us to do our part. That will be the evening for tonight, and inshallah I hope and pray that we all will stay until the end and extend all that we can. Doesn't matter how much, how little, how meager, but we all participate actively in this event tonight. So with that, I am honored to invite Sister Amana Siddiqui, one of the board members of Council of American Islamic Relations, Greater Los Angeles. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. It's interesting. I'm actually an alumni of UC Irvine. I graduated in 2001. I had the great honor of actually serving on MSU board for 2 years. I'm president in 1998. So it's been a while. I did my graduate studies here, so UC Irvine is very important to me. It's an important part of my history. My husband went here, and I'm really sorry he couldn't come, but I have 2 young kids, so we take turns. And on behalf of CARE, I just wanted to say that I'm proud to be an alumni of UC Irvine, and I'm proud to be an alumni of the MSU at UC Irvine. So I just wanted to make that clear. UCI has always felt like home, and when I came today, I was almost a little shocked. The Student Center is completely different now. This used to be Monarch Bay. I don't know people who went here when I did, so I'm just getting used to the new surroundings. But it's good to see, you know, our campus progress and grow, and part of that is disheartening to see what we have to deal with. And I'm really sorry for what's happening to the Irvine 11, but I also know that this is going to take place in history, and inshallah, when hopefully everything is resolved in our favor, this will be something in the history books that no other religious group has to go through this type of persecution, and saying that they can't voice their opinion and their dissent to a specific group, knowing that they're going to be tried. So you know, it's very emotional to see that, and being representing CARE, I just want to let you know that we are supporting the Irvine 11, and anything that you need. We were there in the beginning, and you know, now you have great legal defense, and we are still going to be there. And one thing I wanted to say is that now I have 2 younger children, a 2.5 and a 5.5-year-old, and I'm teaching them through example, hopefully, to be leaders and to speak out. And when you're young, you say things. Oh, Mom, do you notice that so-and-so person looks like this? But you're like, okay, you're not supposed to say that. Just you teach these filters to your children. And one filter I hope my children never learn is to see something wrong and not do something. If they see something or hear something or know something is going on and they can't do something, then I know I failed as a parent. And the Irvine 11 and the MSU and everybody, they did something that hopefully we can all learn from. So basically, I'm just representing CARE and showing that our support's here. And if you have any questions on CARE and our role, and if you'd like to be part of our organization, I'll be here after the talk, and inshallah, I'll send it back to Dr. Shakil, or Brother Shakil.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Mara. I have a suggestion for you. Your 2 lovely children can be paired with 2 of the 11 young men, so that inshallah their future is secure in the path of justice. With that, I request Daniel Mayfield, the attorney for defense, part of the defense team for the UCI 11, inshallah will give us a brief from a legal perspective as to where the case is and what we can expect and not expect, and move on. Brother Mayfield.
Let me start by saying there 3 of the lawyers out of the 8 are here tonight. That we appear here not because we control the Stand with 11 campaign, but because we came as invited guests of the Stand with the 11 campaign. That they have their role, we have our role. Our role is in the court. Want to also remind all of you that we have from the court an order that we are not to be speaking negatively about the other side. They're not supposed to speak negatively about us. those are the rules that exist for lawyers in the state of California. I'm going to talk a little bit more generally, unfortunately, and not particularly about the case. I want to tell you that, like the sister, I was a student here as well. I was an undergrad student here from 1967 till 1974. Now, parents, that's 7 years. I did what my father referred to as squeezing 4 hard years into 7. It's a long tunnel, parents, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. I got here earlier today in part because some of my plans for the afternoon fell apart, but I walked around. Campus is very different from when I was here. Let me tell you some things about this campus that you don't know. Right outside these windows that you can't see through, there's a big archway. That archway's been here since the beginning. Next to that archway, there's a little manhole cover. I went out and looked at it today. You pull that manhole cover off, and that leads to the tunnels underneath the university. They go everywhere. I promise you. This building, right, the building that we're in, relatively new building, not here when I was here, is the site of the famous Lee Michaels and Frosty concert in 1968. Look it up. The Planet of the Apes movies, I think the third one, second or third Planet of the Apes movie, was filmed on campus here. Was filmed in the plaza between the Murray Krieger building and the Humanities Hall, for those of you who are students here. Because the producers of the Planet of the Apes movies believed that the architecture at UC Irvine represented the evil empire of the future. I think maybe they were right. When I was a student here, Dan Aldridge was the chancellor. They've named a building after him now. Dan Aldridge, if he wanted to talk to you, he'd walk around campus until he found you. He'd grab you, put you up against the wall, maybe, talk to you. Say, I want to know what's going on. Talk to me about this. If you wanted to talk to Dan Aldridge, you could go to his office. Knock on his door, say, Dan, I want to talk to you. If he wasn't busy, he'd talk to you right then. If he was busy, he'd make an appointment, he would keep it. Times have changed. The protests that we had here primarily took place in the plaza, that would be, well, pretty much right behind us, between what is now the Study Center and the Langston Library. It was the Commons and it was the library. There was only one in those days. Most of those had to do with the war in Vietnam. I want to tell you about 2 protests. It was one of the issues that we had when I was here was about getting student representation on the faculty senate. So, we students went to the faculty senate meeting. It was held in the biggest room on campus in those days, held about 400 people. As soon as the first faculty member stood up to speak, the first student then stood up in the audience, spoke at the same time. Faculty member stopped speaking, student stopped speaking. Second faculty member stood up to speak. Second student stood up to speak. They finally stopped the meeting. They said, does anybody have anything to say? Everybody sat quiet. Then the third faculty member got up to speak, and the third student got up to speak. Eventually, they figured out that they needed student representation in the students in the faculty senate. Does that sound familiar? Another demonstration we had was in what was then called the Mesa Commons. That's not there anymore, although I walked over there today. The housing is still there. The Mesa Commons was where we ate, and there was a big glassed-in room, glass on all 4 sides. There was a point in time when the University of California Regents decided that they would come to the campuses and have their Regents meetings on campuses. They came to UC Irvine. They met in the Mesa Commons, surrounded by glass. We stood on the outside of the glass. Made signs, put them up against the glass. Then after a while, we started banging on the glass until the meeting stopped. Sound familiar? This, by the way, would be the UC Regents that had Ronald Reagan, Catherine Hearst, Edwin Pauley as members. This morning I had breakfast with one of my old professors. We talked about our lives. We talked about how things have changed in 40 years. And at one point, close to when the breakfast was over, I reached across the table, took his hands across the table. And I said, Professor Olin, because he is my professor. Dr. Olin, you don't know how often I use the things that I learned from you in American history class. How often I talk about the Constitution. How I talk about the contradictions that led to our Constitution. The contradictions in our Constitution. Dr. Olin reached across the table, took my hands, and he said, Dan, because although I'll be 62 in 2 weeks, I'm still his student. He says, Dan, a very wise man said, our job is not to understand history. Our job is to change history. So this case, the Irvine 11, is built on a history of protest. But this case will cause a new chapter for Irvine. This case will change history.
Thank you so much, Dan. And now we know your age. You're still a very young man.
Prematurely grown.
Exactly right. With that, we are honored to have the attorney Linda Moreno, who is a household name in the homes of peace and justice advocates throughout the country. It is an honor. I can't find a better word than that to have you amidst us and to be part of this history. So join me in welcoming our dear sister and attorney Linda Moreno.
Thank you. I'm not going to be discussing my age, so we're going to table that discussion for another time. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking around, and as a trial lawyer, I would like to see more of you in my jury pools. This is a great jury pool. So when you get your jury summons, please show up. You never know what kind of case you might be sitting on. As my colleague Dan Mayfield said, we are under certain restrictions in terms of what we're allowed to discuss about this case. And we must honor the order from the court. But I'm going to exercise my First Amendment rights, and I'm going to discuss two other cases that I had the privilege of representing, which I think bear upon the Irvine 11 case. I had two cases where I represented Palestinians who were effective advocates for their people against what some people would argue is the brutal apartheid of Israel. So effective were these advocates that they were prosecuted, in my view, for their advocacy. And we call that in my profession a political prosecution. And as Brother Dan said, sound familiar? In these cases, the government criminalized their speech, criminalized the exercise of their religion by providing zakat, all in violation of the First Amendment. So my career in this area began in 2003 when I represented Dr. Sami al-Arian, a Palestinian professor who was indicted on material support of terrorism charges in Tampa, Florida. An editorial wrote in 2003 that when Sami al-Arian went on trial, America went on trial with him. That was very true. The indictment had 53 counts against Dr. al-Arian of material support of terrorism. And you had to wonder, in a case like this, when John Ashcroft, do we remember John Ashcroft? One of our favorite attorney generals, who in November of 2001 gave the following interview. He said, in Islam, God requires you to send your son to die. But Christianity is a faith where God sent his son to die for you. So what kind of justice was my Muslim client to expect from a Department of Justice headed by such a man? And the answer was none. We were to expect no justice from that department, but plenty of justice from the jury. After a 6-month jury trial where the government airlifted dozens of witnesses and victims of violence from Israel, where the government entered into evidence vests, allegedly of suicide bombers with nails, where the government repeatedly entered evidence of violence against Sami al-Arian, we didn't cross-examine a single one of those witnesses, not a single one, because our position was that violence has nothing to do with the message of Sami al-Arian. And the jury, unlike the government in that case, believed in our Constitution. And after a 6-month jury trial, they refused to return a single guilty verdict against Sami al-Arian. The second trial that bears upon this case in relevance was the Holy Land Foundation. Again, and when the Holy Land Foundation went on trial, America went on trial with them. I had the privilege of representing Ghassan Alashi, the chairman of the board of the Holy Land Foundation. And in that case, what the government said against the Holy Land, which was an Islamic charity, the most successful charity in America at that time, the government said every penny that that charity raised, every nickel, went to the needy. Not a single penny went to buy a bullet or a weapon. The government just didn't like the way it went to the needy. They didn't like the zakat committees in Palestine through which the donations were funneled. And ladies and gentlemen, if you cannot practice your religion, if you cannot practice zakat, if you cannot raise money for widows and orphans, that's unconstitutional. It's un-American. In the first trial, the government could not get a conviction, and I won't go into all of the amazing and various permutations that that case went through. But at the second trial, they did get a conviction. And in part, they got a conviction through the evidence of an anonymous expert witness, the first ever in recorded history. A witness who came to court whose identity was withheld from the lawyers and from the clients, and who testified as an expert that he had never been to a Zakah committee, had never read a book on Zakah committees, had never talked to the recipients of donations from the Zakah committees, but he had this uncanny ability to smell Hamas. Exactly. Now, notwithstanding these superlative canine abilities, the first jury was not impressed, and they refused to convict any of the principals. In the second trial, as a result of many adverse rulings, they did get convictions. But I wanted to quote to you, and I hope that this is inspiring to some of the students who are here. My client, Ghassan Alashi, at his sentencing, by the way, for his work as the chairman of the board of the Holy Land Foundation, which provided tens of millions of dollars of support to Palestinians, the poorest of the poor, he received 65 years in prison. And at his sentencing, he said it was an honor to get this conviction. He said that the Holy Land Foundation was an ambassador of a generous, charitable face of America, a goodwill ambassador of America to the Muslim world, a charity that provided scholarships, equipped clinics and hospitals, provided ambulances, school backpacks, shoes and uniforms for those children. That the Holy Land Foundation gave hope and life, hope and life. And what was the occupation giving them? The occupation gave those people death and destruction. And we are turned criminals? And he ended by saying it was an honor to serve the people of Palestine through charity. And when I talk to him, I will share your enthusiasm. And so, where are we today? I can't talk about the Irvine 11, but you have to wonder why that passion? Why were they talking about this? What has changed for the Palestinian? Why are people passionate about them? Just a few facts. Almost 6,500 Palestinian civilians have been killed since 2000, with over 1,500 children. 45,000 Palestinians injured during that period of time. In the last 40 years, 650,000 Palestinians have been detained. 25,000 Palestinian houses demolished since 1967, with over half of those since 2003. 650,000 settlers confiscating Palestinian land, displacing Palestinians. And the Israeli settler population has more than doubled in the last 10 years. Since the siege on Gaza in 2007, 95% of the factories and workshops had closed, leading to over 40% of unemployment. As a result of the continuing damage to the water system in Gaza, at least 95% of the water drawn from the system is not potable. How does this happen? American tax dollars have been subsidizing this occupation, this repression and brutality against the Palestinians. $170 billion have been given by us, by you, to Israel, a quarter of which since 2003. The United States has cast 42 votes to shield Israel from any condemnation of its illegal occupation of war crimes. All the while, my clients have been aggressively prosecuted by the government for speaking out for feeding the wrong women and children or protesting a speech, it's a disgrace. So what can you do? Well, legal defense funds like the MLFA are in the noblest traditions of democracy. What I want to say to you, as the great 13th century poet Rumi said, you think you are a drop in the ocean, you are really the ocean in a drop. Be the ocean. Give. Stand with the Irvine 11. Thank
you. In the Islamic tradition, Sister Linda and Brother Dan, and Jackie. Jackie's also here somewhere. Where are you, Jackie? Jackie Goodman. All of the attorneys, we respond because when we lack the best that we can offer you in reciprocity to the good work that you do, we say Jazakumullah khairan, which will be translated by that. No, I'm kidding. It essentially means may the best of the rewards from God be toward you. And we mean it from the bottom of our heart. And I'm sure all of the participants here join me in extending that prayer for you and your families, your children and grandchildren to come. Thank you so much. With that, we break for prayer. And we will be back from prayers approximately around 8:20, my memory serves right, 8:20, 8:25, and then we will have the rest of the program. I believe the prayer hall is behind this hall, and those of you who wish to refresh yourself for in preparation of prayers, I believe the washrooms are on the other side, and God willing, we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you so very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I tried, but I failed, I confess. And I'm confessing in front of a very devout Catholic, Dr. John Esposito. With that, I am requesting the founder and the president of Muslim Legal Fund of America, a premier organization that is a sister organization to organizations like MALDEF and SALDEF and several other defense fund organizations who are standing up for causes that transcends ourselves and our communities and our faiths and our traditions for the sake of justice. So join me in welcoming Brother Khalil Meek, the president of MLFA.
Assalamu alaikum. We can all take our seats in the back. We'll get started. Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. It's an honor for us to be here, to be with so many distinguished guests and community leaders, Dr. Esposito and Linda and Mayfield and all the people in the crowd. I want to give you all a hand for coming out tonight and being part of this. I want to give special thanks to go out to the Irvine 11 campaign and all the volunteers who organized the event and promoted it. I want to thank them and congratulate all of you who are in attendance today for your sacrifice, part of your valuable weekend to attend today's program and to show your genuine concern for the serious matters that we're going to discuss tonight, or that are being discussed tonight. I'm the president, one of the founders of the Muslim Legal Fund of America based in Dallas, Texas. How many of you are aware of our organization before tonight? By show of hands. Takbir. Alhamdulillah. The Muslim Legal Fund was founded in 2001, 10 years ago. This is our 10th anniversary. And the Muslim Legal Fund is based in Dallas, Texas, but we handle cases all over the United States. We are a legal fund and not a law firm. I'm not an attorney. In fact, the Muslim Legal Fund has no attorneys in our office. We collect funds and then we hire the best attorneys all across the nation to help Muslims face legal challenges anywhere in the U.S. MLFA is a public cause charity, a 501c3 that is zakat eligible and tax exempt, and we raise these funds to help our Muslim brothers and sisters face legal challenges. And for the last 10 years, MLFA has focused on cases that have the greatest impact on the American Muslim community. In most cases, if you'll look at your brochure that's in your chair tonight, you'll see that we're defending our imams, our activists, our community leaders, or one of our charitable organizations. The Muslim Legal Fund is defending those who, prior to their indictment, were serving the Muslim community, who are respected individuals in their communities, who are considered valuable assets and for their contributions of helping the Muslims fulfill their religious obligations, and who are teaching, serving, and giving contributions to our community. This brochure you have tonight is for you to take home, but I also want to encourage you to take another book with you. These are out in the front, or they have them they can hand out now, which is more details that we're showing on the screen here tonight, more about our organization so you can see what we are doing and what we're trying to accomplish. Before I go any further, Linda mentioned that the Holy Land Foundation and what was going on in that case. I just want to give a brief update before we get into the Irvine 11 and what we're here for tonight. The Holy Land Foundation, once the largest Muslim charity here in the U.S., as you all know, was shut down in 2001 by executive order. It went through 2 trials. The first trial, the jury couldn't find anything that they could say that the Holy Land had provided any material support or done anything wrong. And yet in the second trial, after the government put on a case where our lawyers called for dozens of mistrials, were successful in getting a conviction. And she told you a little bit about what Ghassan Alashi said. He said, if feeding children's a crime, I'm proud to do what I did. And he actually testified in front of the judge as to being honored for everything that he had done with the organization. But in that second trial, just to let you know what's going on, we have appealed the decision. Calling for mistrials means that you are adamant about your disagreement that the judge didn't give you a fair trial. And when we filed the appeal with some of the best lawyers in the country, the lawyers are very optimistic that this is the strongest appeal they've ever written. So this is good news. But that's not what I want to share with you. I want to share with you 3 other things about the case. One is there's a group of lawyers in the United States called the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. It's an organization. It's called the NACDL. And the NACDL is mainstream American criminal defense lawyers. It's lawyers, retired judges, military. It's over 50,000 people who belong to this organization. And this organization looked at the Holy Land trial and looked at the appeal and saw what took place in the courtroom and decided that it was so serious that they needed to file an appeal with our appeal. It's called an amicus brief. So they said, we agree with the Holy Land's arguments, and they added their weight, their clout, and their voice to the appeal, saying this has to be reversed. The National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. We also had a professor at Georgetown University named David Cole, who's a constitutional scholar who sits on committees that see which cases have enough merit to go before the Supreme Court. He looked at the issues involved in the Holy Land trial and he said this has to be reversed. So he wrote an amicus brief, an appeal to agree with our appeal. And he went out to other charities around the country to have them look at this and see if they would sign on. And he got the Carter Center, President Jimmy Carter, the center signed on to it, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Rutherford Institute, the Council on Foundations, which is another 1,750 member organization. So these other organizations looked at this trial and said this has to be reversed. And finally, the last thing we had, there's a clinic in Austin, Texas, called the National Security Clinic in Austin, that teaches law at the University of Texas and also has the right to look at any cases that have to deal with national security issues, and they can weigh in on appellate issues. They can, as a matter of law, they can practice or appeal anything that they deem is relevant to due process, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, or any other matters that they think are important. They looked at the Holy Land trial, and they said this was so egregious that they wanted to file the appeal for the organization. So they stood up and said they're going to file the appeal for HLF as an organization on behalf of the organization. So just to share with you that, you know, things are happening, and that in this particular case, the non-Muslim community is rallying behind the Muslim community, saying that what took place in that courtroom, because what the argument was before the jury was that the Holy Land Foundation was providing food, clothing, shelter, education, and medical supplies to Palestinians. And the government said the reason that's a crime is because they use zakat committees to deliver it. And they said everything went to humanitarian aid. But when the zakat committees delivered the aid, the government said they have a theory. They said that we believe, the government believes, that those zakat committees are under the influence, are operating on behalf of Hamas. And because of that theory, that's what the government's theory was, that when they delivered this humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, it was winning the hearts and minds. Winning the hearts and minds of Palestinians for the organization of Hamas. And that was what they tried to convince a jury was a crime. So I'm not here to talk about the details of it, but since Linda brought it up, I wanted to share with you the good news that the appeal is in progress. We now have oral arguments scheduled for Monday, which is August the 29th in New Orleans, and that'll be the end of all of the presentation from the lawyers, and then we'll just wait for the Fifth Circuit to make a ruling, or to give us what we call render their opinion. So that's an update. Now, back to our mission. You know, these individuals that we're defending, you know, they find themselves wrongfully accused and unjustly prosecuted. People who in their communities believe, or their communities believe, that these people are being persecuted by an overzealous government. Cases that seem to be politically or religiously motivated. These cases are good people who are facing very serious allegations. Allegations that do not fit with their character, of their known reputation, of their actions and their behaviors within their community. MLFA is allowing these communities to exercise their constitutionally protected rights by providing the means to establish a charitable legal fund, to support their brothers or sisters in need, and to give them the opportunity to tell their side of the story, to give them the best attorneys in this country, and to defend their rights in what we all know to be extremely difficult times. The Muslim Legal Fund and our attorneys are committed to preservation of the rule of law, due process, and protecting constitutional rights, and to give everyone a fair and impartial trial. The attorneys that you see that we work with and that have passion for this work are striving to keep politics out of the courtroom and to keep prejudice out of our juries. How many of you, by show of hands, think that innocent Muslims should go to jail to give the public a false sense of security? Raise your hand. If you think we should send a bunch of Muslims to jail so everybody else feels good. You don't think that's right? Neither do we. The Muslim Legal Fund considers it an honor for us to stand beside these individuals during their most serious and emotional time of need. We encourage you to read our brochures, the book, learn more about our organization and our noble mission. Please take them home tonight. Today, our government has become very creative in its ability to bring charges against people. I don't have time to go into this because it's not our goal tonight. But what we're seeing all over the country is the government has created an atmosphere where they can actually produce indictments that are based on preemptive prosecutions. These are thought crimes. How many of you have seen the Minority Report with Tom Cruise? Right? The whole idea of that premise of the movie was to catch the bad guys before they did something wrong and prosecute them. Right? Well, we're seeing that today. We're seeing the government being able to manufacture charges through agent provocateurs. We're seeing the government press conspiracy charges that criminalize speech and attempt to criminalize humanitarian aid. We should always remember that the vital issues that concerned our founding fathers in the days of the early republic was not the economic prosperity. Their concern was not the distribution of resources. Their concern was not the establishment of political parties. The central question that commanded their attention was what list of constraints that the government, what list of constraints and prohibitions would be placed on government authorities to protect the people from the coercive powers of improper action. In the words of the great American patriot Patrick Henry, the Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government. The civil freedoms of people in the United States are written in the Bill of Rights, including freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, freedom of expression and action, freedom of the press, freedom of lawful assembly, freedom of association and movement, and the protection of these rights from government interference or restrictions. The other civil rights and freedoms are seen as manifestations of respect for the rule of law in the state, even before its citizens. Americans learn at an early age, from grade school, to take pride in their country, not because of our vast resources or prosperous economy, dominant culture, or powerful military. We are taught from a young age that what distinguishes our country is the constitutional system and the constraints of powers of government, even when the majority of people may be willing to concede our rights or freedoms. Ever since the tragic events of 9/11, America's civil freedoms have been threatened. Everyone's affected when the government abuses its power or targets a segment of its citizens. When such government abuses take place, they do not end with the other or with the weakest link in society. Let us never forget the saying of Pastor Martin Niemöller over 65 years ago. When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent because I was not a communist. When they locked up the socialist, I remained silent because I was not a socialist. When they came for the trade unionist, I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I was not a Jew. And when they came for me, there was no one left to speak out. Thank God we're here tonight because not all of us remain silent. Thank God that some of us speak out. Thank God for the Irvine 11 who were not afraid to speak truth to power. As all of you, I too am deeply distressed by the DA's decision to file criminal charges. There's absolutely no need for criminal prosecution or criminal sanctions in this case. This can only lead to serve and to set dangerous precedents for the use of criminal law against nonviolent protest. It will have a chilling effect, and it will be a grave mistake if this is allowed to succeed. Charging these students and potentially sending them to jail is completely and utterly ridiculous, as they are outrageously excessive in charges and draconian in nature. The prosecution are an assault on our democracy and our Constitution, and our collective expressions of dissent. These students did nothing more than protest the same way other Americans protest every day without being criminally prosecuted. I read a press release, I believe, from the University of California Riverside faculty. It's in the press kit that I have. I cannot put it any better than they did, so I'm going to read what they said, because I think they summarize why we're all here tonight. I quote, "Regardless of our varying perspectives on the students, their political views, or on the propriety of the strategies used to express their views, we are unified in our common belief that the decision to criminally prosecute these students is a grave mistake. Rather than protect free speech, this prosecution will likely silence and intimidate those who wish to express their political dissent, thus posing a real threat to our constitutional right to organize, to meet, and to pursue, or in the pursuit of political goals. These charges are a form of selective prosecution They are discriminatory and designated to produce a chilling effect on subsequent exercise of free speech rights and public dissent. Organized student protest has long been a part of American campus culture. If these students are guilty of conspiracy, what group of people who meet to discuss forms of protest is not? Indeed, heckling, shouting, and interrupting are all standard actions in public protest by the left and the right. Prosecuting these students, while thousands of others such similar acts go unprosecuted, suggests that these prosecutions of the Irvine 11 appear discriminatory, based on the identity of the protesters or on the specific content of their protest. Such prosecutorial bias would, to say the least, be unconstitutional. It is absolutely an unduly harsh and unduly selective response, completely out of proportion for the peaceful expression of dissent by the students. Most importantly, criminalizing this sort of peaceful protest on a university campus, or indeed anywhere, would establish a damaging precedent that would resonate far beyond Southern California. Such selective prosecution cases chilling effects, not just for the students, but for Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, but for all citizens who will be made wary of exercising their ability to organize politically and dissent peacefully. Universities are spaces where public dissent and freedom of expression are learned, and where our democratic traditions are thus developed and refined. Like I said, I couldn't put it any better. Tonight we're here because we want to remember what took place. We want to hear from Dr. Esposito and the attorneys of what's going on. But we're here because we as a community care about this cause. And the Muslim Legal Fund has established a legal fund for this case. The attorneys have been hired for all 11 students, and we have to fund the case. So we're going to ask tonight that you support this case, because the funds that are collected tonight will go for the Irvine 11 case and not all the other cases. We want you to be aware of the Muslim Legal Fund, what we do, who we are, and we hope that you are motivated to continue to donate. But tonight is for the Irvine 11. And I want to end in closing and say that the Muslim Legal Fund is honored to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties of the Constitution and the laws of the United States that guarantee everyone, that are guaranteed to everyone in this country. Let us not forget that our religion, as Muslims, encourages all of us, when the Quran says, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for Allah and be just." And be just, that is next to piety. And our Prophet, peace be upon him, encourage us when he says that we as Muslims are humans, should love for our brothers and sisters what we love for ourselves. He goes beyond that and says our faith is not complete until we love for others what we love for ourselves. And that includes our freedom, our liberty, our security, our dignity, and justice for all. Thank you for coming. Assalamu alaikum.
Brother Khalil, for sharing the fine work of MLFA. I believe this document is out there. Complimentary copy you can pick up or go to the website mlfa.org to learn more about and support not only tonight but on an ongoing basis. Before I request the keynote speaker, if I may request Brother Yaman Kahar, who is the member of the Governing Council of Muslim American Society for the Greater Los Angeles chapter, to please come and share your expression of support for UCLA. Brother Yaman.
Assalamu alaikum. I won't keep you too long. I want to listen to Dr. Esposito as well. I just wanted to express, on behalf of a person living in Orange County, but also as a member of the Governing Council for the Greater LA Chapter of Mass Muslim American Society, how honored and humbled and inspired I am by the Irvine 11 mass stands behind you. You have created a backbone for the community, and we urge everybody to support the Irvine 11. Obviously, everybody who's here supports them, but we urge everybody who's here to go back and talk to your families, your neighbors, your masjids, and we hope that the community continues to rally behind this very worthy cause. I was a student not here a long time ago, and I won't go into stories. Back then, 20 plus years ago, it was rallies for apartheid, and like the previous speaker said, what the Irvine 11 did is well within the American tradition. So thank you to the Irvine 11 for preserving not only our Islamic values, but our American values. Please donate tonight, support this organization, and support the Irvine 11. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
I forgot to convey an amana, a trust from a dear friend of mine. Her name is Ray Abile, a member of Code Pink, who had the distinction of standing in Congress and protesting against Bibi Netanyahu. For those of you who are familiar with Urdu language, Bibi means old lady. And Ray said to convey the best of greetings and salams to the UCI 11. She did nothing different than what you all did in a different forum, but she is not penalized as the UCI 11 stands today, potentially going to be penalized. It is my distinct honor to invite and introduce the keynote speaker for tonight. As I understand, I and him share one common denominator, other than being human beings. My middle name, many of you may not know, is Yahya. And John is translated as Yahya in the Islamic vocabulary. So it's a great honor to have Sheikh Yahya Esposito today amidst us, an eminent scholar and professor of religion and international affairs at Georgetown, author of several books, many of whom we have read, and if you have not, you should. It's an honor that he has taken time out to come here to share his reflections, obviously for a cause that transcends all of us, and at the same time that binds all of us irrespective of our faiths and traditions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Esposito.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, although it always strikes me as kind of bizarre how perfectly rational people will come to a meeting and sit as long as you do and stay awake when I get up to speak. So we've got a bit of a problem there. Let me begin to wake you up by the fact that I'm somebody who's very conscious of age. And so some of you have heard me say this before. One, it's very obvious if you know me that I dye my hair this color. It's not, but this is my natural color. Secondly is that from listening to some of you kind of pathetically talk about turning 60 or 67, I can only tell you that Abdullah, who drove me today, talked about his father as elderly, and I'm older than his father. So, having said that, it means that it's time for me to go to bed right now. But I want to say that I really am very honored to be here, and for a variety of reasons, I might not have decided to come here if it weren't for the nature of this particular case. I speak here both as a scholar who has studied Islam in the Muslim community, as somebody who's concerned about issues of freedom of speech and civil liberties, but also from the perspective as someone who's not a kid who just refers to the apartheid demonstrations as if that was ages ago. But I actually was a young academic at the time of the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam movement. And as I was saying to somebody during the break, in those days you had a sense that we had pushed it to the edge as far as you could go and still function within the system. And clearly people were put down within that system. but no one would have thought that we'd get to a time today where one could find the space to come up with the kind of situation that we're looking at today. A situation in which both, at times, members of the administration at this university who've made certain decisions don't seem to recognize what academia is about and what a university is about. And clearly where you have the state, as far as I'm concerned, intervening into the business of a university and criminalizing actions which just simply shouldn't be criminalized. I'm going to try to summarize fairly quickly what I have to say. The gist of this is on a blog that I did on Huffington Post this past week. So you'll see both this and some further comments that I have about it. We live in a post-9/11 world where the threat of terrorist attacks remains real. But, as a British reporter wrote recently looking at the situation of European Muslims, of all the specters haunting Europe, none are as potent or potentially disruptive to democracy as Islamophobia. And I think in America we've seen this in light of Park 51. We've seen it in the tsunami of negative actions, attempts to shut down mosques, desecration of mosques that occurred after Park 51. We saw it in the congressional elections. We saw the tip of the iceberg, Newt Gingrich tells us, in the GOP debates. If you want to see my comments on that, it came on Faith yesterday. And we see that it's going to be part of the presidential elections. And we see it in the kinds of cases that we're talking about today. The fact that Samuel Arian, and we have to be grateful for this, is still under apartment arrest for something like 4 years. We're supposed to be grateful about that because the alternative is not that he would be released, but more than likely he would be sent back to prison. We see it in the Holy Land Fund case, which is an outrageous case. And as people were quoting what some of the people who were sentenced said, one of the most striking things for me was at the beginning of the, when I first got to the courtroom, I was introduced to the daughter of one of the defendants who was found guilty. And the first thing she said to me is, "I'm so-and-so, the proud daughter of," referring to her father. Now, the fact that she could do that was amazing to me. I mean, I was delighted to see the way she talked about her father, but it was also incredible that somebody had to actually be put in that situation for what was being seen as a crime. When we look at this situation, it gets even more outrageous. Regrettably, in America as in Europe, the pursuit of domestic and international terrorists, which is a legitimate pursuit, has become an excuse to limit the democratic rights and freedoms of ordinary, mainstream American Muslims and the erosion of civil liberties. And if that's the case, it's the erosion of all our liberties, because all Americans are equal in terms of their citizenship. So whether you're a non-Muslim or a Muslim, it's an issue. Law enforcement efforts authorized by the federal USA Patriot Act and other counterterrorism laws have increasingly been used to criminalize acts of nonviolent civil disobedience. That almost seems like, again, an obvious contradiction in terms. How can you criminalize nonviolent civil disobedience? You think about all the examples in history. The Irvine 11 are victims of the dangerous climate that has resulted. One needs to think about who these young men are. Again, I was kidding during the break, and I hope some of the young men don't mind, but you know, from a 60s point of view, it's like, what are you kidding? You guys look all so damn straight, it's unbelievable. I mean, you know, where's the hair, the beard that I had, the manner in which we kind of conducted ourselves. I could show you old pictures, I'm sure, of some of the lawyers here. But, I mean, you guys are so straight that it's unbelievable. But here we are, criminalizing nonviolent civil disobedience. And yet you're members of a community of some 6 to 8 million Muslims that gets brushstroked by what a tiny minority does, And it gets brushstroked in a society where it's not a matter of saying, this is Esposito's opinion. This is the opinion of lawyers. We have hard data now, coming from major polls by Gallup and Pew, that the vast majority of American Muslims are educationally, economically, and politically integrated. And that in many of their cultural, pluralistic attitudes with regard to religion, etc., they are integral to American society. And yet, despite that hard data, we live in a context where the most outrageous things can be said on TV, on the internet, and in courts at times. Things that you could say years ago about African Americans, but now would clearly be racist. Things that you could say about Jews years ago that would be seen as anti-Semitic. Things that you could say about Italian Americans years ago that you couldn't get away with today. And that's something that we don't think about. I often say if you take a statement made in the media and you strike out Islam and Muslim and put in Jew and Judaism, or African American, or what have you, an editor wouldn't dare run it. Or there would be a hue and cry. The Glenn Becks of the world would be shut down. So here we have kids with that kind of background, and if you look at them, the actual students, they go to first-rate university, first-rate education. I haven't seen their grades, but they look pretty intelligent to me. They seem fairly straight. That may be a little bit of your problem, but we can talk about that later. But the reality of it is, here we are, and they find themselves brushstroked, not just by their act of civil disobedience, but I would argue by the religious situation that they come out of and the political situation that they were responding to and the position that they were taking. And those who would represent a reverse position and disrupt would not in any way have had the kind of problem that has occurred. Well, how are we to put this into perspective? Part of the problem that we have is what universities are about is that young people go there to learn about the world. They go there to learn about being critical thinkers. They go there to use the Jesuit phrase that Georgetown and all Jesuit universities adopt from Father Pedro Rupe, who used to be their general. They go there, from my point of view, to be trained as men and women for others, among other things. So you get that training, and part of the education is that you're going to act on it. It is not uncommon for students who are at a university to get involved in campus groups that then engage in following up on issues on the environment and social justice, etc. And we like to see them do it during breaks or to go away during the summer. We would expect that many of them would go on to professions that would deal with many of those issues. It's kind of outrageous that if a student is being trained to think away, to be a critical thinker, and to realize that you don't just talk, you walk, that then on campus, no, you're not supposed to walk. And so if you go to a lecture, and the lecture from your point of view, and the person who's speaking, is saying things that are outrageous, that are simply wrong, that you're going to want to interrupt and say something about it. But the question is, how much do you actually do? And the fact is, we know that this was a very controlled form of civil disobedience. The fact that you have an individual gets up, reads a short statement from a card, and then politely walks away and leaves the room. So, and then another one does it, and then when they're finished, they're gone, and the talk can continue, and the speaker can continue to speak. You look at that and you say, that's an activity that you would want to see in a vibrant university setting. But what makes it even more outrageous is when you attempt to criminalize that act, and when the county and the state intervene in what's going on in the campus. Because not only is that wrong, but what's the message that is sent? It totally intimidates conversation. It intimidates students from speaking, not only speaking out, but what's the next step? Do I speak out in a classroom situation? Especially when I see a report that one of the faculty members warned somebody about how they'll do in exams? Do I just speak out publicly? Do I speak out in any public situation in the university or off campus? What can that lead to? That adds to the problem that we have with regard to members of your community stepping up and getting involved in the very problems that your community has, to supporting these kinds of situations. It intimidates everybody across the board, and it intimidates non-Muslims. Should one speak at these events? How many of us who speak at these events know that within the next day or the next week, we will be out on the internet? Many of these times when we speak in places, we don't even know it, but people are taking our pictures. Not that I'm accusing this gentleman of it, but I will grab his camera before he gets out of here. And they're taking notes, and within 3 days, they're misquoting you on the internet, creating a link that gets sent all over the place. So this is a real threat to the very fabric of the civil liberties of all Americans, not just to these young people. But on the other hand, we have a long history and tradition of nonviolent dissent. That's what's important. We have a history and a tradition of that. And it's existed throughout many major social issues that we face. And indeed, most of us thought that what went on in the criminalizing of dissent that began in World War I and worked its way up right through the McCarthy era, many of it thought that that had passed. But we can thank George W. Bush for introducing a McCarthy-like era, and we can thank those that carry on that tradition, and we can criticize, even those of us who support the Obama administration, that this administration is not stepped up when it comes to addressing both the wrongs that occurred in misusing counterterrorism law during the Bush administration and the continuation of parts of that process today. Yet President Obama himself noted in New Hampshire, when a crowd of protesters regarding abortion disrupted his speech, he noted that America has a long tradition. He said, "Let me just say this, though. Some people got organized to do that. That's part of the American tradition that we are proud of." Now, I'm sure when he went home, he turned to Michelle and said, "Those blankety blanks, they annoyed the hell out of me for interrupting me." But he stepped up to the plate and said, "This is part of the tradition. This is who we are. This is what free speech is about." I can think of no place where freedom of speech and dissent is more important than the university. As I said, this is a place not only for learning, but it's a place for action. If we simply teach you and teach you not to act or to be afraid to act, then we're back into you're just a couch potato. You know about all the injustices, and so what? It's what many of my Arab and Muslim friends do, right? You get together for dinner, you talk about Palestine. Right? Oh my God, we bleed for Palestine. We sweat for Palestine. We decry what's going on in Palestine. We decry all those that do the wrong things on Palestine. Then we break and have dinner. And then after dinner, we do a wrap-up, and we go home, and we feel better about ourselves. The question is, do we do anything about it? Well, we know we're better because we're not like all the other people who aren't talking about it, who aren't getting together, who don't come to the meeting. But the question is, what are we doing about it? Are we doing things about it? Are we putting our money where our mouth is? That's the challenge, and that's the challenge tonight. But I think the challenge goes beyond simply the fundraising tonight. It's exactly what was said previously. Your job is to go out and to reach out to other people and get them involved. We have too many empty chairs here. It's unconscionable. And pardon me, since I'm leaving town at 3:30 in the morning, I could care less about insulting people. But the reality of it is, it's your community that ought to be here in greater numbers, and it's members that are not of your community that ought to be here in greater numbers. And it's members of this academic community that ought to be here. Even those of us that sign statements. It's easy for us as professors to sign statements. The question is whether we get off our computer and then go out and do something about it. That has to be done. We all know that at great universities like this university, and Georgetown and many others, we've had many occasions where students disrupt. The question is not whether they disrupt, it's whether they shut down. But we know that that goes on, so why act like that didn't occur? But we don't wind up with the kind of reaction that came both from the university and from the state. And yet, from what I can see in my own research, on this campus, you had college Republicans planned and deliberately denied a speaker's right to speak and shut down the event. They had a large, pre-made signs, went on stage, took the speaker's microphone, and shut down the event. That's a problem. That's when kids should really be penalized. That's when kids, from my point of view, should be suspended. Did that happen? Not as far as I can tell. Did the city's district attorney come in and prosecute? Not as far as I can tell. And they were doing it to an Arab Muslim speaker. Well, I wonder if there are any other factors that come in there. I mean, if we look at the content, I just sort of, wonder about that. And I wonder when prosecutors move, if they wonder about whether or not they're going to alienate the Arab and Muslim community and whether or not that can cost them votes. When we look, for example, at the congressional elections and we see how many people jumped on board. The tragedy of our congressional elections and the tragedy of what our next presidential elections will look like is that we're not talking about members of anti-immigrant peripheral political parties. We're talking about members of our mainstream political parties, the Democratic and the Republican parties, tilting far more to the Republicans. I should point out, as I love to remind my friend Sammy and his family, when I first saw a picture of Sammy when he posed with the then Governor Jeb Bush, I said, "You're making the same mistake Italian Americans and others make. We come over, we're workers, we're Democrats. We start making money, we become Republicans. You can't trust them." Okay. The reality of it is, what we see now happening is that mainstream politicians feel that they can garner a lot of votes, not just from rednecks. They obviously know they can garner them from people who are otherwise very well educated, are otherwise very nice people, but have become not just anti-Muslim, but anti-immigrant in general. We're living in that climate. And so this case takes on a very important context. And when those students did disrupt, one has to say, who did they disrupt? And I'll try to bring this to a quick end. They disrupted a person who wasn't just a PhD, wasn't just an academic, wasn't just an academic who last job was at Georgetown University, but was in fact someone who had been a member of the Israeli Defense Forces, was a member of the reserves, and that while a professor at Georgetown was called up as a reservist and went as a reservist, which I perfectly understand. If he's a reservist, then he would feel an obligation to go. But he went there to be a spokesperson for the Israeli government in their invasion and in the war in Gaza. Now, that's his right. He may feel that's his duty. But that level of involvement is not simply that of a career diplomat, which he was not. That level of involvement is not simply that of an academic. That is a deep involvement and identification with actions that were committed and that were identified by UN Committee, by Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, when they talked about the fact that both Hamas and the Israelis had engaged in war crimes. And when Human Rights Watch talked about the fact that, and underscored the total disproportionate amount of firepower and violence that was committed by one side vis-a-vis the other. Now, again, perfect right for that person to engage in what he chose to engage in. That's between himself, his country, his God, etc. But the fact that you have that person then coming to give a presentation, it's understandable that somebody would jump up. Think about other topics that would be really hot topics. A racist, an anti-Semite, I mean, you name it, who would come and give a speech, and people in the audience would hear something and feel, that's simply wrong. That's simply inaccurate. Somebody would feel, I at least have to stand up and just briefly note what has been said, and then they left. They didn't just stay there and try to scream and yell, shout them down, and shut down the program. This is why we have to be very involved in this issue. This was a peaceful protest. It was a peaceful protest and dissent on campus, and it was about free speech, the right of assembly. To the extent that we don't act in support, to the extent that this case is not successful, that will affect not just the civil liberties of the Muslim community, it will affect all our civil liberties. And that's why, as we move now to the next phase, in which we move to the funding phase, it's very important that you become involved. And because of the fact that we don't have the numbers that I would want to see, I mean, others can speak for themselves, but I believe in big turnouts, because big turnouts, if you're fundraising, makes for big money. You get a lot of young kids. They don't feel that they have the money. So what I would say to you is, if you don't have the money, then don't buy DVDs, don't buy CDs, don't buy new clothes, etc. So get real, give as much as you can, but more importantly, go out into your community and get more members of your community to be aware of this and to give, and think about holding your own functions. A simple way to raise money is to have dinner parties and raise money. And if you're really smart, you figure out who you're going to invite to the dinner party. So if you don't have the big people to invite, you get a smaller amount to give that smaller amount. If you have others, you invite them. And I leave you with this story on how to get people to show up. It's an analogous story. I spoke to a very prominent Muslim leader. And because we know all imams, like all religious leaders, are very humble, he had a major problem getting imams to come to a meeting because, of course, every imam is very busy and very important. And so he said, I could never get to come to a meeting. Finally, I figured out how. I wrote to all the imams in this city, and I told them that we were having a meeting, and they would, each of them was told they were going to receive an award. Everyone showed, not one was absent. And then he said, after giving them their award, we got down to business. So, I'm delighted to be here. I say that in a lot of speeches, but particularly to the students who were involved. You took a principled stand. I don't know if, when I was your age, if I not only would have taken it, I might have taken it, but whether or not I would have stuck to it. And you've been remarkable, and it's our job to support you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Esposito, and I agree with him that we have a job to do for the seats that are not full here. I may be trying to find the right word. How can I phrase this as Executive Director of Islamic Shura Council without my DAs coming on me. You all and we all, I too, have a job now. I am reminded of that prophetic tradition where Prophet ﷺ said that I'm conveying this message to you, and your job is to take this message and convey it to others, and may the recipients of this message, who are the last, may be the best of the takers of this message. So I believe we all have a responsibility to convey that message, and also, and this is the risky part I'm going to share, and also protest in our masajid and the imams and the board presidents why they are not here today. And I'm saying this. at the risk of being suspended in Islamic Shura Council. And you will all come to my defense, inshallah.